Okay, so public versus private goods, and it's a small concept, and I do suggest that you watch this before you watch this video and the video on merit and demerit goods before you go on to the video on market failure, because you'll need to understand this in order to understand exactly what market failure is. Okay, so public versus private goods, very small concept there. If you look at sorry, so if we make a column about, let's say, private goods, so there are two things rather that distinguish private from public goods. There are a few features. So the first is how these are sorry, not rejectable, these are rival, my bad, uh, how they're excludable. And I'll just put this out here as well. So usually not you I mean, like, in recent marking schemes, the I the the criterion of rejectability wasn't really there. Um, but in older marking schemes, they have added rejectable and non-rejectable as a third criterion. So I'm just adding it out there. It's not very important though. And if you look at um, public goods, it's just literally the opposite. So they are non-rival, they are non-excludable, they are non-rejectable. But now let's understand what we mean by this. So rival, right? So the idea of rival is that um, consumption by one particular individual reduces consumption for others. So we can even write this down to this. So rival, consumption by one reduces potential consumption of others. What do I mean by this? I mean that if I go to a store and I pick a packet of chips, which chips are private good, there will be less packets of chips left for other people. It was indeed mine. मैंने उनसे कोई चोरी नहीं किया है. I just went and bought it. But the idea is so potential consumption for other people would go down because there's a limited amount. That's the idea of a good being rival. Another way to explain this is that if um so provision sorry so provision of the good or service to additional consumers adds a cost. So again, if you wanted to provide, I don't know, let's say the same amount of chips to more people, then you would incur a cost because you need more packets of them, right? So the two things kind of go hand in hand. I mean, you just need to use one. The idea is that if by consuming something you reduce it, then obviously to provide the good to more consumers, you'd have to incur an increase in cost because then you need more of the good, right? Kind of like links to the idea how it consumption decreases the amount available of the good. If but if you take the idea of something being non-rival, and the ideal example to go with public goods is that of a street light, right? So a street light, no matter if one person stands in its vicinity, no matter if 10 people stand there, no matter if, like, 15, 20, it doesn't matter, right? Like, there could be a lot of people there, so one, two, three, whatever. Consumption by one would not reduce the light available to other people. Just because I'm walking by and the street light is helping me find my way back home doesn't mean you can't walk by either, or doesn't mean that if you started walking by, the light available for me would somehow go down. It's there. And by the second definition, make like, if additional consumers come and they want to consume this particular service, there's no additional cost in providing that service to them. So that's the basic idea of something being non-rival, where it doesn't matter if one person consumes it, the potential consumption for others still remains the same. It doesn't really decrease. So that's rival. The second metric, which is more important, it is pretty important, is the idea of excludability. So whether something is excludable or non-excludable. So something is said to be excludable. So it is excludable when you can restrict non-payers from consumption. Idea basically is जो मुफ्त मारने वाले लोग हैं उनको आप दफा कर दो. So if I go to the store and I not willing to pay for the packet of chips, the store guy, the shopkeeper can simply like beat me up and throw me outside the store, right? That's the idea. If I don't pay for it, I won't consume it. So with private goods, some they are excludable. However, with public goods like infrastructure, your basic streets and roads, or let's talk about the same example about the street light. It doesn't matter if if like let's say guy A owns the street light. uh, Guy A may have bought the street light. He might even pay the electricity bill for the street light, but I can go buy, right? Because it's in a. I mean, like the guy can't restrict me. The guy can't be like, no, 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 shut your eyes, like, uh, or configure the street light in such a way that whenever someone else who hasn't paid for it goes by, it shuts off. That doesn't happen, right? So the idea is people can consume this non-excludable goods without paying for them. So when something is non-excludable, and this is very important in understanding why the private sector doesn't produce public goods. So when things are non-excludable, people can consume without paying for them. And that is problematic because it leads to, and this is a nice term, the free rider problem, where basically mufta maar diya, like you haven't paid for it and you're consuming it. So people aren't going to be willing to be willing to pay a price, because why would they be willing to pay for something that they can consume for free? Because of all of this, particularly the free rider problem, and you can't exclude non-payers from consumption, the private sector doesn't produce such goods. By such goods, I mean the non-excludable goods, which are public goods, right? Because if people aren't willing to pay for it, then you don't have any profit, right? And the private sector revolves around the profit motive. So that's something I missed here. So like the profit motive. Right. So this is a very important, um, well, bad handwriting, but I was trying to make a start. So that's a very important point. Um, so another thing, let's talk about rejectable and non-rejectable, and then let's move on to clarifying one important thing. Okay, so the idea behind rejectability, um, so a good is said to be rejectable. You know, if you can choose to not consume it, to put it very simply. So that's why private goods are rejectable. If I want, um, if I don't want to, let's say, buy that packet of chips, well, I don't have to, right? If I don't want to pay for it, I don't want to buy it, I don't. However, I can't simply stand up one day and be like, well, I don't want the army, so I'm not going to pay any taxes because I had just chosen to opt out of the consumption of the service that the army provides. It doesn't work like that, right? So that's why with public goods they're non-rejectable, private goods are rejectable. But this particular metric doesn't really appear in marking schemes anymore. Rival and excludable are the more important ones. That just let you guys know. Another thing is with regards to public goods, some goods may fit one out of the two metrics rather than both of them. So they may be rival but not excludable, or vice versa. And you'd call them quasi public goods. But again, you don't need to know that much about it. So there's one very, very, I don't know, widespread misconception that I want to clarify that a lot of kids do have. So just to clarify that, So private goods provided by the public sector are still private goods. Don't get this wrong. So a lot of people, they have this misconception that when the government opens up a school and it's free, it's a public good. Why? Because the public sector is providing it. Or when the government opens whatever, like whichever hospital, and it's free and it's a public service, public hospital. Just because you call it a public hospital doesn't mean it's a public good. These are still private goods. They are just provided by the public sector. It doesn't make them public goods. The only thing that makes something a public good if it's non-rival and non-excludable. So if you take the example of the school, sure, the government's providing it, the public sector is providing it, but we don't care who's providing it. We look at the two metrics that we talked about. But a lot of people, they think that now that the government's providing it, they're not charging a price. They're not charging a fee. So if they're not charging a price, then they doesn't really meet the metric of excludability, because you have to exclude non-payers, and here people aren't paying anyways. Well, that's a misconception. The idea behind excludability is that there is that you can potentially exclude non-payers. So if you wanted to charge a price, you could exclude non-payers, right? Just because I let someone eat for free in some random hotel doesn't mean the whole hotel is a public good, right? Just because we didn't exclude one non-payer. Potentially, the nature of the good or the service was such that you could exclude non-payers. Hence, the good is excludable, whether or not you choose to exclude non-payers, whether or not you choose to charge a price, that is irrelevant, right? So the idea here is, the government could, in the public school, they're not excluding anyone, admittedly, but potentially they could just charge a price by charging fees the next day and exclude people who don't pay their fees. So that is still a private good. Healthcare is still a private good. Doesn't matter who provides it, because it just fits the two metrics. It is rival, it is excludable, thus it is a private good. So don't get that wrong. Don't go around calling especially merit goods to be public merit goods. That's going to get you in a lot of trouble. So private goods are still private goods. Doesn't matter who provides them. And that's it for this video.